Okay, so we're here today with Ted Walker, who is the executive director of the Children's Justice Center of Summit County and has been um, since April of 2019. The Children's Justice Center has been at the Community Partner of the Month for Temple Har Shalom in this month of July. And as we've been doing for several months now, we are recording this Zoom and presenting this Zoom and giving Ted the opportunity to make a presentation and tell us more about the Community Justice Center. Before he became the executive director, he has worked for the Division of Child and Family Services for 20 years, serving in various capacities, and he's also a therapist in private practice. He's worked as a therapist in private practice, helping families, couples, and families that struggle with depression, anxiety, addiction, and other mental health issues. And like everyone in Summit County, he enjoys lots of outdoor sports. Like some people in Summit County, he likes riding his motorcycle. And with his wife, Lisa, he has 5 children who live here in the Wasatch Back. So without further ado, Ted, tell us about the Children's Justice Center.
Awesome.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Let me share my screen here. Everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
All right. So let me tell you, first, let me tell you a little bit about the Children's Justice Center program. It was started back in the early 90s in Utah. Prior to that time, children that were being interviewed about abuse or neglect issues often were interviewed several times. One time, by the police department, another time by Child Protective Services, and maybe another time by medical personnel if they were involved as well. They developed a program in Utah. Throughout the country. These centers are called Children's Advocacy Centers. In Utah, they are called Children's Justice Centers, and our program runs a little bit differently and is funded through the state and federal government as well as the county government here in Summit County. Previous to 2012, we shared space with Wasatch County over in Heber City. They have a Children's Justice Center over there. And in 2012, our beloved Dr. Christian Sally brought the Children's Justice Center, or gave us our standalone Children's Justice Center over here in Summit County, and actually asked for some space. It was originally over in the Richens building in the basement of the library over there until December of this year when we moved into our new building. The Children's Justice Center program, like I said, here primarily we interview kids about abuse and neglect issues. And I'm going to see if this video is going to work so you can see it. This is a little video that we put together, informational video. It's about 5 minutes long that talks about Children's Justice Centers and just kind of general information of what we do here.
Sound. Ted, is there audio?
Let me take my earphones out. There is audio. Sometimes it doesn't work when my earphones are.
Ted, I think that when you I can't tell you offhand because I've only done it a few times. But when you show a video, there's some way where you have to tell it that you're sharing the audio as well as the video.
Let's see, it's probably on a setting somewhere.
Yeah.
I've done this a couple times and it's worked, so I thought I took for granted that it was just going to work. Looks like it's not working that way. We can try it again and see. Doubt it. Sometimes if I do it this way.
What is a Children's Justice Center? A Children's Justice Center is a confidential environment where victims of child maltreatment are interviewed and resources provided for the victims, families, and secondary trauma victims. The Children's Justice Centers utilize a multidisciplinary team approach, including members from law enforcement, prosecutors, child protection disciplines, and victim advocacy to ensure safety, reduce further trauma, and foster resilience. The Children's Justice Center of Summit County is the beginning of the investigative and resource process.
The Children's Justice Center is a child-friendly, neutral setting where children are interviewed regarding allegations of abuse or neglect.
These centers are specifically engineered, and a lot of thought goes into these buildings to provide a place for that child to go into a room. You think going into a room with a complete stranger that you've never met before, that can be a challenging situation, especially if you're, 5, 6, 7, even teenagers have a difficult time in feeling comfort and being able to open their mind and express what's been, buried deep down inside for quite some time, and to express that to somebody you may not have ever met or known before, or somebody that's wearing a badge.
Back in the old days, children are interviewed several times in several different places. The police department, the Division of Child and Family Services, or even in the doctor's office.
My name is Dr. Christina Sally, and I am an investigator for Summit County Attorney's Office. I founded the Children's Justice Center in 2012 here in Summit County, and we're so fortunate to have this new space to provide resources and have a child-friendly environment to interview children in maltreatment. And so with me is our very special therapy dog. This is Callie. We call her Callie Sally because she is actually my dog, but she's also comes to each of the interviews with me and is sort of the mascot for the center. Okay.
The moment you walk in the door, it's comfortable. It feels like a home. It doesn't feel like you're walking into a exam room or some clinical setting. There's friendly people. There's friendly service dog. There's lots of space to accommodate families and keep them comfortable during these difficult situations.
So they come in, we usually offer them a drink or a snack to try to help them feel comfortable while they're here. And meanwhile, the parents might visit with the investigators for a moment, and they also meet with a victim advocate, the child, to kind of get them familiar with them. The child's then interviewed while the victim advocate meets with the parents. And afterwards, after the child's done being interviewed, then generally the investigations team will meet with the parents to talk about further action, what's going to happen next, and maybe safety plans or issues to make sure the child's safe and home.
You think about child abuse or maltreatment or neglect, and it's something that you don't ever think is happening next door. There's no way this could be happening 5 houses down or 10 houses down, or you see it on the 10 o'clock news. You see it, really bad situations from time to time where it's just mind-boggling that something like that can happen.
There was one situation in which a child predator had actually really become involved in the family and had taken the child on various trips, and the family completely trusted this perpetrator. And so it's very insidious, and most families are absolutely shocked when it ends up happening within their circle.
And to get this information out, to let people know, hey, we got a Children's Justice Center to hold educational gatherings for the community, gets them talking about it. And hopefully, again, it's a difficult topic to talk about amongst neighbors and amongst friends or family, because nobody likes to talk about that kind of stuff. But if we don't talk about it, it becomes the new norm of, well, I'm not going to talk about it, or I don't want to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. But if people talk about it and know that it's something that we aggressively look into, all claims of abuse or neglect or maltreatment, then hopefully somebody that may find themselves in a difficult situation may come forward and say, you know what, yeah, this isn't okay with me. You know, I don't want to live my life like this. And especially, you know, the child who, again, isn't as experienced as adults, or maybe they've just lived their life that way and they think that's the norm of life. When they get into a group of friends and the friends are like, really, you live your life like that? That's not normal. You know, we need to talk about that.
There's a supportive process through the victim advocacy program. We have victim advocacy programs both in Summit County and Park City, and they follow the case through the criminal process and can provide help or support on an ongoing basis for those victims.
All right. Kind of gives you a kind of an overview of what we do here. We're just following up on a few things that were mentioned in the video. Kind of the purpose of the Children's Justice Center is to provide that warm, comfortable place for kids to come into so that they can be interviewed about these difficult things. While they're here, they also complete a trauma screening, which oftentimes can indicate mental health needs because of depression or anxiety, PTSD, or other symptoms. And because when we do that, we're able to provide resources or refer resources to people that are involved on those topics and other things as well. If there are other things that the family needs beyond mental health treatment or other resources, housing, food, those types of things, we're able to make referrals or even provide some of those things. If needed, we're also able to provide a medical evaluation. Our medical director is actually Tony Lasky, who's the director of Safe and Healthy Families at Primary Children's Hospital. And we have a whole medical suite. We got a grant a few years back to provide all the equipment for our medical room. And we're able to do that right here as well. So the idea is, instead of people going to different places to receive these resources, that they come all to one place, which is the Children's Justice Center. And our also part of our mission and purpose is to educate family about the signs and symptoms of abuse and the impact of secondary trauma. Because when people, their families come in here, it's often not just the primary victim that has a hard time with it and is having some difficulties. Parents sometimes don't know what to think or how to act, and siblings as well. And so we try to steer them or help them have as much information so that they can process and possibly get them treatment as well. There's some misconceptions about what the Children's Justice Center is or is not. And some of the things it's not, because people just read the name of the Children's Justice Center and they think, well, it's a home for wayward children. Kids that get in trouble have to go there and they stay there. That's not accurate. It's also not a shelter for abused or neglected children. Nobody stays overnight here in this home. It's specifically for the purposes that we've outlined before. And it's not a drop-in facility either for children who may be victims of maltreatment. Kids that come through here and families that come through here have to go through a process to get here. What it is a trauma center for victims of maltreatment. We're kind of a triage center at the very front of the investigation process with law enforcement and child protective services. Our interviews are by appointment only, and they go through law enforcement or Division of Child and Family Services. And it's one of the first steps to the healing process for children and families. This is where things are brought up that have never been brought up before. That may have been like the lieutenant said, that may have been sheltered away for quite some time, and those things come out. And we use a multidisciplinary approach to child abuse, to dealing with child abuse and neglect, which we'll talk a little bit more about. This is kind of the model. As I talked about before, instead of resources, and I don't know if you can see that little picture over here. Instead of all the people going to all the resources come to the people. And that's the idea of the Children's Justice Center model. And some of the team that are involved, they're trained forensic interviewers, of which Dr. Sally is one. Some of the detectives are also trained forensic interviewers that have a lot of experience in training and interviewing children in a specific way. Child Protective Services, which is also here, which deal with the child welfare issues and end of things. Other law enforcement personnel, investigators or detectives that deal with criminal activity or determining if there's, I should say, gathering information to determine if there is criminal activity. And those are the core, as well as the victim advocates that are here when the children are here and the families are here. The prosecution is a part of our team because all the information that's gathered here is given to the prosecution team, and then they determine if a crime has occurred or not and what charges would be filed if they're filed. The prosecutors do that. And then also, I also talked about the medical exams. So we have our medical specialists that are specifically trained. Dr. Lasky is a specialist in child abuse, a pediatric child abuse. That's what her specialty is. And she is wonderful. And we also have on our staff a trauma therapist that is able to meet with families as well to process this information and hopefully start the healing process and get them going down the right road.
If I could just jump in with a question.
Okay.
How do most children or most families get to the Children's Justice Center? I mean, I'm sure there are different avenues.
So a report has to be made, and that's kind of a little bit farther down the line. The answer would be, or the question would be answered, but a report has to be made through either law enforcement or the Division of Child and Family Services. Those are the two routes that it usually gets reported. And a child may disclose information to a neighbor, ecclesiastical leader, a teacher, a coach, any of those people. And in Utah, actually, everybody's a mandated reporter, and that's kind of farther on in the presentation as well. But
okay, and just on that though, just a reminder about timing. We're trying to keep these to, and it's wonderful so far, informative and interesting, but want to try to get through it. Just a reminder on that. But so just back to the question though, and the answer. So with all of these mandatory reporters, I mean, those that eventually gets to you. I mean, those people know to contact you or contact law enforcement.
Yeah, part of my job is to coordinate the interviews and get the victim advocate, Division of Child and Family Services, and law enforcement all here at the same time. And so I coordinate and schedule all those interviews with those folks to get the family here, and then they communicate with the family about times, what's best and not, and kind of move forward with the interview. There's the dog again. We won't talk about much about the dog because everybody loves the dog. We can just get through some things. This is a picture. We do some fundraisers in the community. This one's called, we've discontinued this one, but a couple of years ago, we were sharing with Weber County, and it's called the Sheriff's Ride for Justice, a fundraiser that we held up here in Summit County. We're working on some future things, and that's where the community can get involved that way to help support the Children's Justice Center in fundraising and education and awareness as well, because it's a tool for that. It's not just a fundraiser. I mentioned mandatory reporting. In Utah, all adults are mandatory reporters. You shouldn't really do your own investigation if a child discloses things to you. You should report that to Division of Child and Family Services or law enforcement. And here, because I have a lot of experience with Child Protective Services, I can answer some general questions regarding situations and give some guidance if that's needed. There's a hotline number on here for DCFS there, and then Summit County Dispatch. So those would be the two avenues to report, and then the children would get an interview scheduled here. There's a video, but we're going to skip that.
What is a children's
That's just a video. It's about a 5-minute video about mandatory reporting that kind of goes more in depth of that information. But what happens in cases where, in addition to the DCFS and law enforcement involvement? So I talked about this, the prosecutor, our special victims prosecutor screens, reviews that information, and based on that report and any evidence, they'll make a decision whether a charges would be filed or not. So the law enforcement officer doesn't do that. Child Protective Services doesn't do that. The prosecutor makes that decision. And just because they decline a case, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen or the child was not believed. Sometimes it's just a matter of the lack of evidence or other information that's missing, and they aren't able to charge people with the crime that way. And services they continue to be provided if needed. We've had one child that we've been working with. We've been providing therapy services for almost 2 years now because other issues keep on coming up. So we're available, and actually our multidisciplinary team talks about these cases on a monthly basis and reviews needs and kind of where the criminal case is at as well. One of our newest, within the last 3 years, we've started to do trauma therapy. And it's based on our trauma screening that I talked about, that screens for suicidality, depression, anxiety, those types of things. And based on that information, we are able to provide on a limited basis some trauma therapy by a certified trauma therapist here at our center. It's kind of limited to dealing with issues surrounding the maltreatment, and it doesn't cost anything to the client. It's actually funded through a grant, and it's free to those families that come in. But it's not meant to be long-term therapy to address significant mental health issues, but will address those issues dealing with the maltreatment that they came into the CJC for. So that's kind of a general overview of the Children's Justice Center. So any questions that you guys have?
Ed, I have a question. So you talked a lot about bringing the families in. What percentage of the children that you're seeing, are you finding that the mistreatment and the abuse is actually happening in the home? And how does that affect the process?
So the cases that are investigated are both investigated when the abuse happens in the home or is alleged to happen in the home and outside of the home. So it could be somebody, it could be a family member, it could be a stranger or a different acquaintance, and those are both interviewed. As a general rule, while I was with Child Protective Services for that long time, and I had my hand in investigations the whole time I was for the whole 20 years. About a little over a third of the cases were supported, meaning there was evidence enough to believe what was reported happened because of the evidence that was gathered. Criminally, it's a little bit different, and I don't have statistics on that because the burden of proof is higher. In child welfare, the burden of proof is more likely than not, so 51% to 49%. And in criminal cases, it's much higher than that. You know, it's a reasonable doubt. So it's probably 70-30 or something as far as percentages are concerned. So a little bit different, but they have different roles as well. Because law enforcement's doing an investigation to gather information to determine if a crime occurred, and in DCFS and Child Protective Services are dealing with safety and ongoing safety in the home. Not that law enforcement doesn't do that, because that's the #1 priority, but and they use the same information to get to the end of the case, but their roles are much different.
Yeah, but does that, there's some tension there, I would think. Do you find that the law enforcement aspect of the center's work sometimes, it just stands to reason that could be a, deterrent, or at least intimidating, sort of side issue initially, and when families find out that that's part of the process, how do you deal with making sure, or trying to make sure, that doesn't interfere with getting to where you want to go with the particular allegation?
Many times, because the investigation teams work together. Law enforcement will do home visits with them. It's not a situation that the investigative team is separate. And when you explain that this is dealing with the child and the child's safety most people understand that the children are the most vulnerable population that we have. And so in a family setting, sometimes there is some tension about those types of things, but most people understand kids' safety trumps everything. Even if it's a misunderstanding, even if they sometimes don't believe the child, their perception of the situation, the child's perception of the situation, is what matters most. And most people understand that. And we don't get a lot of pushback about that usually. We get pushback about other issues or situations, like the need for therapy, because everybody has a different view of therapy sometimes, and the benefit of therapy. But usually on the investigative side, we don't get a lot of pushback.
All right. Well, again, thank you for what I thought was a wonderful presentation, and call it quits here and wrap it up. But it's been great, and as I've mentioned to you, we will keep this posted for the Temple Har Shalom congregation to view for a long time. It'll be available, and it's really been very informative. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And obviously my contact information is on here, as well as Dr. Sally's, and the 2 reporting lines as well, for those that are looking at it now and in the future. So I'd be happy to ask or answer any questions and help people out in whatever capacity that they need.
Great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ted.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.